I am Neil Kaufman. When I'm not moonlighting as the chairman of the Long Island Capital Alliance, I'm a partner and the chairman of the corporate department at Abrams Fensterman, one of Long Island's largest law firms. For over 25 years, the Long Island Capital Alliance has assisted local companies in raising capital by introducing companies with growth prospects to investors who then finance those companies, enabling them to grow and produce jobs and economic growth in our local community. We have helped dozens of companies raise hundreds of millions of dollars. We've also introduced many companies to executives and entrepreneurs who've been able to help drive that growth. Let me explain how this event will proceed this morning. After a few preliminary matters like this, I will introduce John Maroney, the Vice President of Technology Transfer at Cold Spring Harbor Lab. He'll describe some of the lab's history, some of the companies they've formed, and some of their licensing activities, and explain to you really the tremendous track record that the lab has experienced over the years in turning Long Island technological discoveries into successful businesses. After that, I'll introduce our presenters this morning. We're going to have 4 presenters. Each one will present for 8 minutes. We'll have 2 or 3 questions from our panelists and the audience for each presenter. There'll be no breakout sessions during the presentations themselves. If anyone wants to speak to or meet with any of the presenters, we ask you to do that immediately following the conclusion of the event this morning. After all of our panelists have gone, we'll then after all of our presenters have gone, I'll introduce our investor panelists. We'll have an interesting discussion about the presenters this morning, the biotech industry, technology transfer in general. Again, I'd like to really thank the folks at Cold Spring Harbor and John Maroney in particular for spearheading this event with us this morning. I'd like to thank the sponsors of the Long Island Capital Alliance, my firm Abrams Fensterman, the Long Island Forum for Technology, Insperity, and Carter, DeLuca, Farrell, and Schmidt are all platinum sponsors. And our gold sponsors, Citron Cooperman, Executive Strategies Group, Ruskin Moscow, Deloitte, and MarketWire. At this point, I would like to introduce John Maroney, the General Counsel and Vice President of Technology Transfer at Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory, to share with us a few words about the lab. John.
Good morning, and Neil, thank you for inviting us and for the Capital Alliance and inviting Cold Spring Harbor to this important meeting. I am Vice President of the laboratory and in charge of tech transfer, and I'm also General Counsel, so I have a number of fairly significant hats. I'd like to give you some quick background of the lab. I don't know how much of you know of its history and place, but then to try to turn towards also a quick review of our tech transfer activities over the last 2 decades, and how important these activities are at Cold Spring Harbor. The lab is located the main campus of the lab is located in Laurel Hollow, which is 120 acres on the west side of the harbor. We control most, if not most, of the buildings on the other side of the harbor. Over the years, we've gradually acquired them as they become available for the purpose of maintaining this fantastic bucolic environment so close to New York. This is virtually a pristine inner and outer harbor. The lab began as a field station of the Brooklyn Academy of Science in 1890, and it was quickly, because of the rediscovery of Mendel's laws, converted into a plant genetics study where George Shull in 1908 discovered the first hybrid crops, specifically corn. A very big breakthrough, which is one of the components that is result for the fact that when we grew up, it was said that children in China are starving and children around the world are starving, and by and large that's not true anymore. The laboratory has several campuses, the 120 acres in Cold Spring Harbor. We have a campus on Lloyd Harbor for our conferences and meetings of 35 acres in what is a former estate and has been endowed by the donor to support it. So they have some of the most fantastic meetings there, including, going back, the very first meetings on HIV and AIDS, and where it was discovered, it was mentioned that between the physicians, oh my God, I have 7 patients with those same symptoms, and it literally was a starting point. And I think that's the nature of the lab, to have been very far out there, and because of its meetings and courses program, 12,000 of the world's leading scientists and researchers in biological sciences come to Cold Spring every year. That's a lot. And usually they are often the leaders, and over all these years' time, there are very few leaders in molecular biology and biology and science that do not feel a connection, having taken one of our courses, attended several of our meetings, and lived in this wonderful village of science, because that's what it is. People live on the grounds, there are libraries, there's the huge infrastructure that Jim Watson has spearheaded the creation of over the last 30 years. The lab has 1,400 employees, growing from 70 employees when Jim Watson first came to the laboratory in 1968. Over 400 PhD researchers, so there's an awful lot of bang for the buck in such a relatively small, compared to MIT for instance, but intense organization. And that intensity certainly was always there even before Jim, but he raised that several notches. And even the architecture of the laboratory, his vision, I would urge you all, if you can, to take a tour of the lab, because it is literally a striking experience. People say, graduate students have said, young people have said, that has changed their lives. And we know that. We offer internships to some young people, and I can't tell you how many times this has literally changed their lives, to see how science operates, the way it really operates. The laboratory's been, researchers at the laboratory for work done at the laboratory have been recipients of 8 Nobel Prizes, and the lab is rated #1 on the citation index in the world in biology. That's how often your work is cited by other researchers in their articles, which is a really solid measure of the impact you're having on science. And in 1908, following the rediscovery of Gregor Mendel's genetics and crosses, George Scholl at Cold Spring Harbor, the lab was founded in 1890, so in 1908, he discovered and produced the first hybrid crop, which was corn, which again has revolutionized agriculture. The lab has, particularly since Watson joined the lab, an emphasis on molecular biology, cancer, neurobiotics, and informatics. It is a degree-granting institution. In terms of, we grant our own PhDs under the Board of Regents in the State University of New York. It is an inquiry, the lab is a place of inquiry and a frontier in discussion and being totally immersed for young people to come to the lab and have a several-year experience here in which they just are given a tremendous, it's their opportunity. And in terms of commercialization, those people, increasingly they're interested in commercialization. Historically, they've had their 3 to 5 years at Cold Spring Harbor to make it academically, and that's what they focus on. But we've had much success in interest of them as well as more senior faculty. Quickly, the history. Barbara McClintock came to the lab after George Scholl and studied in plant studies and received a Nobel Prize for her work. In 1947, there's a period at the lab that doesn't get a lot of publicity, but was really critical. 1947 to 1954, a lot of the World War II scientists were looking for more interesting things to do and to introduce the physical rules of chemistry to the living cell, which was not done at that time. They came to Cold Spring Harbor, and they did that in the summer of '47. Jim Watson came to the lab in '48, and all the way through '52 in the summer. And he was told, with little ambiguity, that DNA was the genetic material. not protein. Al Hershey and Margaret Chase demonstrated that very clearly in their wearing blender experiments. And Jim, if you think about why Jim, with sometimes not all of the coursework he needed, single-mindedly approached the structure of DNA, even over to King's College, and he ruffled some feathers. But he knew, because he'd been in Cold Spring Harbor, what was really happening. And publication times then took a year or 18 months before anybody else found out. I can't, in 1968, Jim Watson came to the lab. It's hard to understate Jim's impact on the lab. It's been virtually total. Everything from the spectacular and fitting architectural statements that the lab is one of the most beautiful campuses in the country, all the way down to choosing young scientists who he had a knack of, that would lead the laboratory, that were going to be great scientists. And if you get them when they're young, that's the best time to get them. I should mention that with regard to the license technology transfer at the license, one area that started in the late 1970s, early 1980s, Cold Spring Harbor joined into the race for the discovery of recombinant TPA, the tissue plasminogen activator, the blood clotting drug that they give you for heart attacks and strokes. This was a huge market, to say at the time, and the lab took that challenge on and lost by about 3 weeks to Genentech. But it kindled the fire, and we realized, and we started interacting with Wellcome Pharmaceuticals, and on that business letter, which had been unheard of in the ivory tower ages of the 60s and the 70s. And so we've had a number of sponsored research relationships, with probably 30 or more, including substantial agreements with DuPont Pioneer, Pfizer, Monsanto, GSK, and many others, which has enriched the lab, because we found out is companies have capabilities that we don't have. Just because we're advanced in many areas doesn't mean we have the high throughput capabilities and robots and machinery to do things. There are competencies in biotech companies that are very important to the lab, and the lab has recognized that and wants to foster those relationships. We have done, obviously, licensing arrangements which have yielded substantial royalty income to the lab in the order of tens of millions or higher. We've been very fortunate. The most lucrative biotech license was by Columbia University on the Axel Wigler invention. Mike Wigler was at Cold Spring Harbor, so the lab shared in that income, and a number of other similar types of inventions, which we began patenting. Again, another thing that had never been done. In the early 1880s and middle 1880s, the lab was faced with a crisis in this regard. There was a subset of the laboratories board that questioned whether we should do this and move away from our purely publishing capacity. And Jim Watson supported the position, and others at the lab. Our board is very entrepreneurial. They're from New York, and they're investors and hedge fund managers. That these companies and these investors who don't really know that much about biology are making a fortune starting companies on our technology. So we started applying for patent applications, and we were willing to take stock in these companies because they didn't have that much money. And that proved out with the IPO craze of the 1990s to be extremely lucrative. We have more than 20 startups. Some of the more noted ones are OSI Pharmaceuticals, which the lab has done everything it can, including giving up its campus at Farmingdale State University to keep OSI here. But at the end of the day, once Astellas bought OSI for $4 billion, that was our first startup, OSI, and sold for $4 billion. Once that decision was made, the decisions were made in Tokyo, and there was nothing we could do but Astellas is leaving, and OSI are leaving the United States. That presents us with an opportunity, because those buildings are now available for our startup companies. And as Steve Winnick and others can tell you, we've been really struggling for off-campus space, and this gives us a terrific opportunity. Plus, the OSI still has the obligation to pay the rent. I went through those ICOs. OSI Pharmacopoeia was a lucrative company. Helicon is a successful company. More recently, Miramis is a company funded by Topspin that does RNAi mouse-related work, which we're very positive on. And Helicon, and Certara, which does mouse brain imaging to see how psychotropic drugs really act in the brain, and maybe there are drugs that do likewise. The last point I'll just touch on is which we mentioned, the Broad Hollow Bioscience Park. We wanted it to be near the lab, 25 to 30 minutes. It was in the late 1990s that we began this, but I do think that the lab now is at a real crossroads to make this into the Cold Spring Harbor and other Long Island spin-offs home. And also it will have, because Astellas paid for it, a substantial mouse vivarium, which is essential. Things don't work in tissue culture anymore, in petri dishes. Mammals are just too complicated. So we need these systems, very valuable, and I believe this will be a huge magnet to draw, as OSI leaves, to draw companies, exciting companies into the center. Again, it is, I thank Neil for inviting us, and the most important thing is for the scientific presentations, so I'll get off the podium.
Thank you, John. And John really deserves full credit. This was all his idea when he was a panelist at our event for Brookhaven about a year ago. He suggested this, and so he really deserves all the credit. I can't thank John Maroney enough for doing all the work to pull this together for us this morning. So now we're going to start with our presentations. We're going to lead off with something I think you're going to find really interesting for those of us who have fought the Battle of the Bulge over the years. Professor Nicholas Tonks is going to explain to us a new novel treatment for diabetes, obesity, and cancer. 3 for the price of 1.